Hey, John, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be in my own apartment.
Well, listen, hey, I was really excited. This was kind of a red letter day for us for a couple of reasons. So like most people, I think I'm funny. And at this stage of my life, by the way, I also inject just a ton of humor into almost every aspect of life, where it's appropriate and where it's not appropriate. So this topic of comedy and sales, I've heard you on other people's podcasts, and I just think it's such an interesting topic. And it's also really interesting to me for a lot of reasons. Like, I think the bravest people in the world are stand-up comedians who get up in front of a mic and try and make a full of strangers laugh and all those kind of good things. So first of all, welcome to the show, and I'm super excited to have you.
I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I would not say that stand-up comedy takes bravery whatsoever. It just takes a lack of dignity.
There you go.
Yeah, I people say that, oh, you're so brave. I'm like, I don't know. Like, I just have a little bit less shame than a lot of people. I don't know if that constitutes bravery, but I'll let you believe that if that's what you want to believe.
Let's go with the bravery thing. I think it looks better for you. It's also better for
Sure.
the show notes. And by the way, as I was rushing here to get onto the podcast, one of my favorite podcasts is Fly on the Wall. I don't know if you listen to that.
I do. Absolutely.
So with David Spade and Dana Carvey, and talking about some of the experiences Saturday Night Live. And it's just amazing to me, again, the bravery, the courage, because many of the best performers, there's only been about 450 people ever who have been performers on Saturday Night Live. Like over the 50 years, it's really not that big a group. But many of them suffered just paralyzing stage fright, where they'd be having these breakdowns before the show, like some of the best ones. Like Dana Carvey was one of them, by the way, for a long period of time. So it's just really interesting to me, this whole topic. But tell us the short story of your journey. I know you're an enterprise sales expert. How does somebody who's an enterprise sales sort of deep experience end up talking about this topic of comedy and sales?
Yeah, mainly because I didn't want to sell enterprise technology after doing it for about 10 years. But you know what? That's a bit of an exaggeration, actually. Yeah, I was selling Oracle enterprise business applications like Oracle ERP and the kind of all the associated business software with that, and selling professional services, doing really full cycle sales for the better part of 10 years, cold calling, running in deals from the inside. And then kind of going to the outside where necessary to get deals done. So whatever it takes, both for Oracle itself, and then for an Oracle consulting partner. And I hit a wall with everything, and I started performing stand-up as a creative outlet, not even intentionally. I took what I thought was a comedy writing class.
Okay.
And I had taken one in the past, and it was all about scripts and sketches and sort of sitcom pilot stuff. And I thought that could be cool. You meet some fun people, and maybe we create some YouTube sketches or something like that. But I got to the class, and I heard about it word of mouth. It was taught by a stand-up comedian I know. Because it was framed to me as comedy writing, it's a comedy writing class. I had no clue that it was actually a stand-up comedy class, even though it was being taught by a comedian. But I got there, and he said, after I paid him my money, he announces to the entire group, "Hey, everyone, welcome to my class. This is a stand-up comedy class, and over the next 10 weeks, you're going to learn how to craft 5 minutes of stand-up comedy. And after the 10 weeks, you were going to perform that 5 minutes for your friends and family." And my first reaction was, I am not performing for my friends or my family. I'm not doing any of that. I'll just kind of go through the class.
Yeah.
I'll go through the process. But quite frankly, it was a pretty big class. There's about 40 people in there. Not a lot of people were all that funny. There was a lot of senior citizens there and some much younger people. And here I am in my mid-30s, having watched a lot of, I wouldn't say stand-up comedy, but more comedy in my life. And I like going through the process, and he would give us a little assignment every week, and we'd have to sort of get up in front of our peers and deliver it. And I started to realize my stuff is so much better than most of these people's. And they were laughing and enough to the point where I said, you know what? After 6 weeks, I realized I'll do this final exam. I'm still not inviting my friends or family though. Like I don't need them showing up if this doesn't go well. And I did it, and I got laughs in front of a bunch of strangers at the quote unquote graduation show. And then I was like, I want to do that again.
Hmm.
And I did do it again, and I got even bigger laughs in front of let's just say, a less friendly audience. And
Okay.
at no point did I think, wow, I have this figured out. But you just want to keep going as long as the feeling's good. But the third time on stage was in the same venue as the second time, and that was a disaster. I blanked.
Okay.
I bombed. I got heckled by a comedian on psychedelic drugs, and the room was mainly comedians, and it was very hard. And I was up there probably 10 minutes when I was supposed to only be up there for 5, but it felt like a lifetime. And a
How
lot of normal,
interesting.
yeah, and a lot of sane people would have never done it again. But I sort of said to myself, I can't let that be the last time I do this. Like I need to, that's the worst it's probably ever going to get. And it was. And I said, I want to keep going with this. And it wasn't as bad as that third time. And it wasn't as good as those first 2 times for quite a long period of time. And that's really where it started. So that's how I got into all this. Have I answered the question?
You answered a couple of questions, but where does it go today? Do you still do, like, are you still doing kind of open mics and stand up every once in a while? Did that continue for multiple years?
It continued for roughly 12 years.
Wow. Okay.
You know, my first 6, I was actually on stage 3 to 5 times a week. I'd go to other cities. I'd go to Ottawa. I'm based in Montreal, so I'd go to Ottawa. I'd go to Toronto. I'd perform wherever I could, whenever I could. And now we're coming to part of your question. In 2017, I had been dabbling in a couple of comedy-related projects and kind of the travel technology space. I won't get into all that. But in 2017, I thought to myself, you know what? I could be a speaker.
Hmm.
And I wanted to speak on humor's impact on sales, basically, and how, you know, anyone who speaks, presents, or sells can use it as a weapon to earn attention, to build credibility and earn trust, to break the ice, to earn attention, all this kind of good stuff, to be liked. You know, a lot of the things I still talk about to this day. And you know, it's one thing to be a keynote speaker of some kind, and that's not really who I am. I'm not this speaker who comes on stage with a boisterous presence and is rehearsed to the
Says
T.
everything's going to be perfect. This is what you do and all that.
I am not that guy. I'm sort of like some comedians are a little flustered when they get on stage. That's always who I've been. Like you're trying to make sense of the audience, remember your material. That's who I am as a speaker. And I said to myself, this isn't even valuable enough. Even if I was that polished speaker, it's nice, but I need something else. And when I was at Oracle, I had a pre-sales engineer who was kind of dry, at least on the surface. He was actually kind of funny when you got to know him.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on a demo with him, delivering the demo for a really boring financial consolidation product.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of teed off the demo for the vice president of finance and the controller. There's probably a manager of finance on the call. And I sort of tune out a little bit while he's doing the demo. And at one point, he makes some joke, some deep cut, insightful joke about the financial consolidation process. And they laughed.
Mm.
And I was like, wow, that was clever how he made that up off the top of his head. But guess what? A month later, we're doing the not to the same client. We're demoing the same stuff to a different prospect or client. And he tells the same joke again and gets the same reaction. And at that point, I turned to my colleagues. I said, have you ever done a financial consolidation demo with this guy? And they said, yeah. I said, does he tell this one joke? They're like, he's been using that joke for years on prospect after prospect. And I realized at that moment that sales and stand-up have a lot of parallels. And even when I started doing stand-up, I was kind of like coming at it from, well, everyone in the audience is they're like a prospect or a customer. And my job is to make them want to come back and either come back to this comedy club.
Yeah.
Follow me on social media because they find me funny. Like I have to get them to
do something.
That's it. I have to earn their trust really quickly by making them laugh fairly quickly up front in short spurts before they go, you know what, we're willing to give this guy some more of our time and attention. So I found there were all these parallels between kind of go-to-market efforts, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, and the process of being up on stage and being a stand-up comedian. And that's kind of how I started this business. And now I work with sales teams, and we do two things. We go through the process of trying to craft a hyper-relevant piece of humor that shines a light on a problem that we as a vendor can solve for not even our ICP, but for a specific target persona within the organization. It could be
Yes.
C-level, it could be a low-level manager. They all have slightly different objectives, and some are focused on tactical stuff, and some are focused on big picture strategic stuff. So our objective is to write some humor that can then be repurposed across 30 to 50 different touch points and channels. The list keeps growing of where you can use one good bit of humor, even if they don't write a good joke. And they do this all in breakout groups. It's kind of it's meant to be a collaborative process. Even if they don't write a great joke, the big win is the process they go through, because it forces them to think about, who is my target persona and why should they care about us? What problems do we solve?
Yeah, great.
And
Actually, by the way, what we do
yeah,
a lot of training on that. That's a great way of thinking about it. I love that idea of saying, okay, let's understand them so well that we can craft this joke or something funny about the challenges or the issues or the environment or. It's the reason I was so excited to speak today, John. I think there's so many things about this idea of just generally humor. Let's get away from the bravery of stand-up comedy, which, by the way, I think is just, you have to be shockingly brave. All of us, by the way, have done well when we stood up at our brother's wedding and came up with a couple of jokes and had a great speech, because everybody in that room wants us to do well. Very different when you're getting up speaking in front of a group of people who paid money. They don't know you. They're walking into a comedy club. They're actually not that keen on you doing well. Part of it was maybe they kind of hope you do well, but you better do well because they paid to come in. So it's a much more scrutinizing eye.
so I don't think they don't want you to do well. I think they do, because you're right. They paid and they're there for a good time. They're not there to, well, you know what? I really hope that third one bombs, because we need we need to be reset because the first two made us laugh too hard. Like I think they do want to laugh at everybody. They want to laugh the whole night. But you are right in that they did pay, and if you
Mhm.
can't relate to them and show them you understand who they are and what their challenges are and what their frustrations are on a day-to-day basis, and be relatable to them, then they will not laugh.
Well, all these things, all these connections you're making, I see why you've got a business that aligns this with sales. So certainly, even with a workshop that we run, one of the things that's just so great about trying to inject some humor, not trying too hard, but finding that opportunity, I find is it's so authentic. A laugh, somebody who's laughing, any veneer kind of comes down fairly quickly. So a lot of times in sales, you're trying to build some of that trust. You're trying to build some relationship. You're trying to get to an authentic conversation. But at times at the beginning, you come in from a place like Oracle or SAP or somebody of enterprise software. The buyer is rightly cautious, that, and maybe there's a little bit of a veneer or a wall. I think it's just such a human response to laugh that kind of makes a very human connection. So I think whether it's part of storytelling or whether it's just creating that connection, you can't try too hard with it. But I do think there's this great way of leveraging humor just to make everybody, kind of get everybody a little bit more relaxed. And in certainly in the early days in professional sales when I was young, I would have said that, because my personal life was so crazy and fun, I'm a young person living life. I thought I had to be so professional, quote unquote, when I was at the office. There was this veneer, and I probably came across as being sort of uptight and very formal. And, I was trying to be perfect. Whereas I think in many cases, if anybody actually knew that, I enjoyed a drink in those days, maybe stayed up a little bit too late and lived kind of a rock and roll lifestyle. They probably would have liked me more because I was a bit more human, but I was always keeping that to me. And so this idea of kind of nowadays, by the way, I just am me everywhere. Like whether it's we're running a workshop or something else, I'm just going to throw it in. I want to have a good time, and humor's always been part of our family growing up. Certainly part of my family now. All my friends are actually, I believe them to be very, very funny. A couple of them extremely funny. So this way of getting back together and laughing and using humor, just also, by the way, a good laugh. It just feels so therapeutic at times. Just a good belly laugh. There's nothing better.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
But and by the way, but I do think it, back to your standing up on stage, that idea of after you bomb, and by the way, listening to all these comedy podcasts I love, it seems like everybody bombs. But by the way, anybody who's done anything material in sales, we've also bombed too. You've been in this business long enough. You've done this long enough. We've had big deals. We thought we should have won. They didn't win. We didn't win. Every once in a while it goes the other way. We've had great years. We've had some challenging years. We've had fantastic bosses. We have terrible bosses. There's this resilience that I think that's required to make it through a career in professional B2B sales, managing those ups and downs. And part of it is you just keep going. Good things are going to happen, bad things are going to happen, but you just got to keep going and you kind of trust the process. And it sounds like that's really what you did, after, show 3 before show 4, two great ones and then one bomb. And then you go, I got to get back up on this stage.
Yeah, I came up with this line when I started this business, which is whether you want to be in enterprise tech sales or you want to be in stand-up comedy, you don't need 2 business degrees like me. All these take are passion for failure. And in the case of stand-up, that and a bus pass. So you're right, and like I really believe that that resilience is important, but there's another step that both stand-ups and salespeople really need to invest some time in, and that's preparation.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, because like one of the topics I speak to sales teams about is what can salespeople learn from the worst open mic stand-up comedians that I've had the misfortune of sharing the stage with in like 12 years of comedy, because it was really interesting when I started. You're learning the local scene, and there's some people who are pros, and like all you get to do is open mics, even at our local comedy club, the Comedy Nest. And you'd be on an open mic on a Tuesday, and there could be the biggest comedian in town. There could be some up and comers who are kind of like, wow, I hope to get to their level. They're not even big yet they're not even professionals, but they're funny. They're consistent. You see them on bills all around town. And then there was like, the people who are recent and starting and trying to make it. But then there was another group. There was a group of people who they do comedy maybe once a month. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're doing it more than that. But they're never getting asked by a booker to be on a show where they get more than 5 minutes and maybe $10.
Okay.
So they're never getting a paid gig. They're never getting a proper spot, as we call it. They're just getting open mic spots. And I watch them, and sometimes these are people who didn't understand how to relate to audiences. So sometimes, quite frankly, they were people a little bit later in life who were making dated pop culture references for a younger audience.
Yes. Okay.
There was also the ones who they would get up there and like, it took them a long time to get to their first joke, to their first punchline. And they would screw around with the audience a little bit. Whereas for me, I wanted to get my first joke off. And my opening joke for years was that I looked like Ross and Monica's dad from Friends.
You do. Yeah. Elliot Gould, by the way. There's a dated reference. So guys, Google Elliot Gould. Cool dude back in the 70s and 80s.
So let's talk about dated references and why you don't relate. I did start off by saying no. Yes, I'm Elliot Gould, or I forget what the way I phrased it when I started.
Yeah.
But no one knew who Elliot Gould was, even in 2011, 2012 when I started doing stand up. So I changed it to Ross and Monica's dad because that's how people in the audience knew who that guy was.
Yes.
So that took a little bit of like failure and iteration, let's call it. But I knew that I needed when I come on stage. From the moment they call my name and I step up to the microphone, I have no more than 10 to 15 seconds to get a laugh out of the audience that earns me another 10 or 15 seconds of their attention. So to nail that joke, you need to prep a little bit. You need to like have this mindset. I'm coming out there. I'm not screwing around. I'm not saying how you doing. I'm not like, hey, anybody. I'm not asking a question of the audience. I'm just getting to that one thing I want to say to them that'll get that reaction I want. That allows me to like collect myself mentally, so I can get to that next joke I've prepared. Just get to that next joke I've prepared. It's also going to be short. If I get a laugh, then great. I have a third usually. And I think I always used to structure my sets. I always used to try and, to my own detriment, to be quite frank, memorize everything and build a flow. But I watched a lot of comedians who didn't build that flow. And there is something to be said for trying to figure it out for yourself. But I watched too many who didn't prepare. And yeah,
Let's come back. There's so many, like, this is a sales training class. Everything you're talking about is just a sales training class. So that, first of all, let's just go to the Elliot Gould versus Ross and Monica's dad. It's, don't be speak in plain English to the buyer or whoever you're reaching out to. Forget the acronyms and the techno jumbo mumbo jumbo that they don't understand or makes them feel silly or they can't connect with. Just speak in plain English, first of all. The second thing, I love this idea of hey, I walk up, I know what I'm going to do in the first 10 or 15 seconds, and I'm trying to earn the right to keep their attention for the next 10 or 15 seconds. Hello, prospecting 101. If somebody picks up the phone and I'm surprised they pick up the phone and I don't really know what I'm going to say because it's so common that they don't pick up the phone. So I got some mumbo jumbo and they go, who are you? What do you do? And I started spewing some irrelevant stuff like, well, we've been in business 15 years. By the way, you were working for an Oracle implementation partner. Oh my God, there's 10,000 Oracle implementation partners. How would you differentiate? So when somebody goes, well, of course, we already use Oracle or we use offshore or we use one of the other 9,000 companies, you need a good answer for this. And we need an articulate value proposition, not a joke, a value proposition to earn the right to get somebody's time to have a little bit of an authentic conversation. The way you actually, obviously, your workshops are excellent and your speaking engagements are excellent. The way you speak to this is almost exactly how we would train SDRs or BDRs. Like, and thinking about it this way, I love this analogy with the stand-up, the stand-up. And then thinking about, hey, I've got this process. So you said, hey, listen, I used to memorize, how I might go through my act or the other 4 or 5 minutes. Now, you said there were some people who didn't do that. I think in sales, a real huge issue you see these days, Jon, is too many people think I'm great. And by the way, I don't need a process. I don't need a structure because I'm the world's greatest ad-libber. I should be on a stage doing improvisation. And when someone sends them a curve, they just get kerfuffled. They're drowning and they're going all over the place. They start creating objections. Whereas if you do what you did, which is, hey, I've got a plan. But if it turns out when I get up there, you're killing the audience and they take you down a path, but you feel safe and you've got some connections, you can go down another path. You still know where the guiding light here is. I still got my roadmap if I need to go back to it. Doesn't mean you can't veer off it. Doesn't mean you're too structured and uptight. Clear everything if you're watching the YouTube of this, by the way, gang, everything Jon's speaking about, I keep going, well, that's how we do sales training. That's exactly what we train on. So well, keep going. This is awesome.
It's kind of fascinating that you mentioned the whole concept of improv. Improv, when I started this and I told people that my business is comedy writing for revenue teams, people would say, that's amazing. I love improv. And I'm like, no, I am the 180-degree opposite of improv. I'm all about understanding subject matter so you can craft a message that gets repeatable, predictable reactions. Whereas improv is unscripted and it's about creating unrecreatable moments. So people think there is this notion that improv is great for salespeople, and it has certain benefits. I think it's really powerful for listening. I think that's the biggest thing that
Hmm.
improv teaches you to do. But my take is if you become the subject matter expert in your prospects, the problems you solve for who and how they're impacting your buyers, and understand how to quantify that and what questions to ask, you don't need to follow a script, but you're also not going to be improvising. You're going to be having a conversation that's consultative that helps you
Yes.
determine if you could help them solve the problem and how much it's worth to them.
Well, even with that, John, at the end of it, I mean, you say we're not following a script, but you're definitely following a structure. So I'm saying,
Yes.
hey, I'm going to be having this conversation. I want an authentic conversation. I'm in it. I'm actively listening, but I'm probably going to keep an eye on the time to a certain extent to understand, okay, I'm going to get this to a certain level before I then figure out how am I closing for a next step with John, if and when I've made some connections between some of the issues and the challenges John has and some of the ways we've helped other clients in the past. So there is this idea that I've kind of got this roadmap I'm going to try and get to because I know at the end I've got to wrap this thing up at some point in time. The same way you understand when you're on stage that you don't have the stage for an hour. I've got 4 or 5 minutes, but I'm still trying to make that kind of connection. I'm trying to get engagement. I'm trying to get attention and interest. So maybe they, after the fact, they do follow me on Instagram or they do want to come to my next show and so on and so forth. You start to think all of the things you've talked about here, creating a connection. We haven't even got to things like the resilience of handling objections with a little bit of humor, knowing your audience, storytelling, breaking down complex ideas so people understand them. These are some fundamentals of a great kind of sales conversation, an authentic conversation about helping somebody achieve, a business outcome. So all of these things are just so applicable. I had no idea it was going to go down this path. Tell me a little bit more about what happens in some of your workshops or some of the other connections you've made between comedy and sales.
Well, what happens in my workshops is we assign a team to write a joke and we give them, a pre-selected topic. It's usually to shine a light on the problem that the vendor can solve for the target persona or help them think about or consider some outcomes associated with not addressing the problem. Because that's where things can get very specific, and humor is rooted in specifics, but
Hmm.
it's also rooted in truth and pain.
Ah, okay. So outside of the business, we get business solutions rooted in pain, solving a problem. Tell me about comedy being rooted in pain.
Well, let's what are comedians talking about? They're talking about things that frustrate them, like oh, I hate riding on air. Like the old one is airplane food, right? Airplane food is so.
Oh, yeah.
Today, people are talking about online dating and how painful that is quite a bit. It's the things that drive us nuts, the things that keep us up at night. A lot of comedians today talk about how the media fear mongers, right? Like that's a common
Mhm.
thing on all sides of the political spectrum. And so there's only one comedian who I've ever seen. His name is Ron Funches. Ron Funches is his name.
Okay, Ron Funches. Okay.
Funches, Funches. And I'm not somebody who consumes all stand-up comedy. I watch some, especially when I was performing, you're around it all the time. So you had a little less patience for some of the better stuff out there, especially Netflix specials. But I watched Ron Funches because I'd seen him at Just for Laughs. And he started off his special by going, most comedians want to talk about things that they hate or that make them angry or that they're scared of. I want to talk about things I love.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it really was still rooted, as I recall, in his frustrations with those things, the pain around them. So I had never even thought of that till that point, that we're only talking about stuff that drives us nuts and that people can relate to as a result. Because why are people coming to comedy shows? They're coming to forget about their day and laugh at the frustrations.
Yeah.
So that's a huge one. But I would say that going through the process, I challenge like my teams I work with to go beyond like, let's say I'm helping a company that sells sales technology.
Mhm.
Well, what's going to happen if, the sales technology solves this problem? Your technology solves problem X. What is going to happen if they choose to ignore this problem? Oh, they're not going to hit quota.
Mhm.
I'm like, yes, but can we dial it back a little bit? Like maybe it means that the right leads won't get to the right reps, or CRM notes won't get entered properly, or maybe it's sales and marketing are going to have a blockage with each other. Like there's all these specifics of things that go
Yeah.
wrong in every business function, and those are the kind of outcomes we need to shine a light on and show how that those particular specific costs of action are the things preventing our buyer from achieving their real objective, and we have to understand that in the first place.
Peel the onion back.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, at the end of the day, it's one thing to say, hey, we're going to miss quota. It's quite another thing to think about, okay, well, missing quota is an interesting thing. Well, missing quota is going to mean, hey, the company is not going to hit some objectives. Missing quota might mean we're not really helping clients the way we could be helping them. So their businesses are going to suffer. If I'm missing quota, people on my team are going to leave my team. And so, depending upon the age, maturity level, the experience, that could have a devastating impact on a new business professional.
yeah.
So there are a lot of these downstream implications where, the simple way of explaining this in 1998 would have been to say it was identify a need and develop a need. The truth of it is, when we understand some of the issues and challenges, there are real implications to these things. And so sometimes somebody articulating or saying these things out loud causes, them to really think about them for the first time and go, hey, we do actually have to fix this. We gotta make sure, we hit our goals. We don't hit our goals as a company. It's not just my sales team that's going to get cut. There are other roles in the company where people are going to get cut. So I always think there's this tie into this bigger picture and the why. And really the path there is earning that right to this authentic conversation with a buyer. And I need trust and credibility for them to do that. And so I'm trying to figure out what's my path to do. It's not easy to build trust and credibility quickly with a new buyer. This is why something like humanizing the conversation as quickly as possible with something like humor is huge. Again, if it's authentic, if it's a natural thing for you.
Look, one of the things I realized when I was selling Oracle applications, and I'd be speaking with like a vice president of applications at some large company, it's like, I don't really know anything about this person's job. Like I know the basics, but I don't
Yeah.
really know what they live through. And so at one point I said on some other podcasts, I said most sales pros sell stuff they've never used to people whose jobs they've never had in industries they've never worked. And that's why salespeople are looked at with a jaundiced eye by buyers, right? Because you're just a
Yeah.
sales. What do you know about what I do?
Yes.
And again, whether it's the humor, I use the word joke a lot. I don't mean a rabbi, a priest, and a minister. I just mean a short one-liner. The humor is connecting tissue between buyer and seller because it shows if a salesperson, whether they came up with it or not, could deliver a bit of deep cut humor that shows you really understand the inner workings of their challenges and the negative impacts of them. If they can get them to laugh, they're also going to go, geez, that's powerful. They're going to remember that, right?
Mm-hmm.
The memorability to humor, it's educational. It's sort of like, our good friends at Challenger. Like, how can we show a commercial insight in a way that they hadn't considered and get them going, I never thought of that, or we do deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think the process is even more valuable in the humor itself, because if you sort of like just go through the process of trying to craft like short form humor that follows certain rules, you're going to need to unearth a lot of knowledge, insight, understanding, and perspective about these problems and how they impact our buyers. And it'll inform you to be, again, more consultative and be able to zone in on, if I'm talking to a prospect, Are they really a prospect?
Mm, knowledge, insight, and understanding. Fantastic coaching. And by the way, we love Challenger with the teach, tailor, take control. Teach, and when, Matt Dixon has been on the show multiple times, really great guy. Very interesting. They wrote the book without a background in sales. So they were researchers, Matt and Brent, and teach, tailor, take control. But it's that teach, that knowledge, insight, and understanding. And we get the understanding when the buyer actually shares with us, but it's always this journey to get that connection. So they actually want to. So they see a return, on the time they're going to spend to share with us. And by the way, speaking of time, we've got to be cautious of your time, but let me just go down a slightly different path, Jon, because again, I'm sure it doesn't seem like a big deal to you, but I'm pretty sure it's a big deal to anybody listening to this podcast. It's scary to get on a stage to do anything the first time. It's scary to be in sales. It's scary, to pick up, the phone the first time. It's scary to run your first demo the first time, although we don't love demos. Scary to be in front of a senior executive the first time, where somehow they granted you the meeting. So now you're meeting a VP or an SVP of applications. A bit scary. So even today, there's got to be those dates and times when you're going to step on a stage or you're going to do a keynote somewhere where the butterflies are floating around the night before or maybe the morning of. Tell us how you work through your process to actually get on the stage instead of heading for Kamloops.
Yeah, look, I think we got to practice. I think we got to know our stuff inside out to the point where even if we falter, it's not going to come off like we know when we falter. The biggest mistake I made in comedy was I mentioned earlier, I tried to sort of memorize things word for word as I scripted them because I really bought into this whole notion of things like word economy, really being short and sort of joke craft, as we call it. Like how can you get to the punchline the fastest possible? Like that was the 80s was very much 80s style comedy was predicated upon that. Well, what I was gonna say was as I'd be on stage and delivering, I'd sort of like realize as I was saying it, oh, you inverted those words, and then you deliver the punchline, and you're just busy thinking about how you screwed up the setup and get in your own head. And the audience didn't notice. They don't know. And like we're being hard on ourselves as it's going on, but it doesn't matter. People are appreciating it or getting it. And that's when you need to be connected to the room versus yourself. So to connect with the room a little better, you just need to really have a good handle on your subject matter. You got to prep. You got to work on the timing. So for example, I have a presentation coming up at a cybersecurity marketing conference.
Okay.
And guess what? I'm not a marketer. I'm not a cybersecurity guy. And, I don't really know. I'm sort of an outsider, but I was asked to speak because I'm teaching messaging and how to come up with hyper relevant messaging that marketers could benefit from in addition to salespeople. And, I'm really working on my deck right now. I'm working on the timing, the reveals of animation, the pacing. And I think that's the work. And again, coming back to comedians who fail, I could tell some of them just were winging it. They'd get up there, they'd have a rough idea of 3 jokes they wanted to deliver. Some people really are okay at that. And others, it just showed you're not prepared and you're not working at this. So look, we all get butterflies, but preparation eliminates the risk of failure.
Preparation and putting in the work. Again, all of this stuff is the same. Any performance art is the same, and frankly, I think in many ways, sales is a performance art. We're still only spending a third of our time, a quarter of our time in front of clients or prospects.
Mm-hmm.
And professional athletes practice 4 times as much as they play.
Yep.
Who knows? Think of that workshop you did to get 5 minutes of stand-up. It's a month-long workshop, multiple different sessions to write 5 minutes.
Yep.
Like my intro to my next story on the Selling Well podcast takes 7 minutes. So it's such a short period of time. So that preparation, when preparation meets, opportunity, amazing things happen. And I do think the preparation shows 9 times out of 10. And I'm far less worried about being over prepared than under prepared. I feel naked. My confidence comes out of the bottom of my feet if I'm under prepared.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
I'm over prepared, I can work through it or I'll try and loosen up, but it doesn't work the other way.
No. One thing I wanted to add is that another kind of lesson, and it's sort of tied to some of the things that are floating around the ether of this conversation. You know, people come when you have 5 minutes on stage, you need to, in 2024, you need to make them laugh, I would say twice a minute, because comedy has evolved a little bit. But in the 80s, it was you need to laugh every 20 seconds. So that's 3 times a minute.
Okay.
Which means you need to get to that punchline really quickly, which means the longer you ramble, especially when you come out on stage and they don't know who you are, it's just like a cold call. If you keep talking, they're going to be, what's this all about?
Yes.
And, I like to say that, our goal is to make their faces light up, but not because they've just gotten bored and started staring at their phones. We got to craft tight messages that people can digest, simple language that elicit emotional reactions. And that adheres not just for sales, but for sales development, for marketing. So, what everything I talk about is we're talking in the vein of salespeople. This is
Yes.
every go-to-market function. They all need to be subject matter experts. They need to know how to trigger emotions, touch on that pain, and be short and quick and punchy.
Well said, by the way. So at the beginning, we were talking about you helping some of these companies, craft, a message that's leveraging humor to shine a light on a pain point or two. Do you have an example of that?
Yeah. I worked with a client, and I just want to add, though, before I tell this joke, that the value that he's now the CEO. He told me, I don't care that you wrote some jokes or that we wrote some jokes and then we closed some revenue off a cold email, which they did. He says the real value is the process and how it helped his new hires who hadn't even started on the job ramp quickly because I was able to get them to express what problems they solve for who in simple English before they even started on the job.
Nice.
So they're a company, they're called TrustArc, and they're a software who helps marketers and privacy officers manage their global privacy compliance efforts.
Ah, wow. Very specific, extremely specific.
Very niche, right? So in simple language, we all we all get asked to accept cookie consent, every website we go to, and every jurisdiction on the planet has different laws around that. And a challenge that marketers and privacy officers have is they know this is a problem. They know they have to keep up with the laws or else they're going to get fined. But they'll go to the CEO and ask for some budget. And they're just like, I don't know what this is. So the joke I wrote for them is CEOs remind me of my parents. The only thing they understand less than technology is privacy.
That is good.
Yeah. Thank you.
That is good. Not that I'm judging the comedy in any way, but that is good. Short, crisp, punchy.
And look, the reality is I'm not professing that we're going to write Netflix comedy special style jokes that are so cutting and so biting and so, but the bar in B2B is pretty low. Everyone's really dry. Everyone's boring. You just got to make it a little more human, a little more fun. It doesn't have to crush and destroy. It doesn't matter if someone drops dead laughing. You just want them to crack a smile and go, that's cute, that's clever, that's insightful. I like that. Like that's all we're looking for. We're just looking to get a bit of a reaction.
Who are some of your comedy heroes, or when you were kind of getting interested in this, and who do you like today?
So when I was 16, which is not yesterday, I should have said which was just last week. There was a guy here in Montreal. His name was Sean Keane. And you ever hear of this guy?
Rings a bell, by the way. For the listeners, rarity, but I'm actually interviewing another Canadian on the show today. So both John and I are Canadian. So he does ring a bell. And you and I are probably not crazy different ages.
No. So Sean Keane, we were 16. We were underage. We were going to a comedy club that had just opened. And we hear like that, the MC calls his name. and a theme song in like a 40s style theme song with like the Andrews sisters start singing. I'm really dating myself by
Yeah.
saying that. It was kind of like that 40s style tune. This guy emerges from the back with slick back hair, sunglasses, and like a trench coat and a suit. And he's just looking at us and staring at us, and he's chewing his gum. And he just goes, somebody left their gum in the urinal. And he lets out and we're 16 and we're like, this is the funniest thing we've ever seen. He had a bunch of like dark jokes. He wasn't like hyper offensive, but they were a little dark. And we all just adored this guy, but he was the master of like short, quick, dark humor. So he was an original idol. And over the years, like guys like, look, I like Bill Burr. I like my tastes evolve. I like Sam Morrill's a really good joke writer. He's big. Mark Normand. I like Nate Bargatze. He's super clean. I don't care if they're clean or offensive. Like I just like funny. I don't really care. There was someone here, Deanne Smith. She's now in New York, or I don't know where she is, but she was a Scream.
Oh, nice.
Well, yeah. Steve Patterson's always pretty funny. He's not like an idol of mine. There's a guy locally, David Pride, who's quite brilliant. I'm all over the board with it all.
I know some of those names. For me growing up, there was nothing better than Monty Python.
Sure.
The concept of the uptight Brits. My parents are British, so the uptight Brits, and then the look of absolute dismay when they get embarrassed or it looks like they're being silly is just incredibly funny. Life of Brian is one of the funniest movies I've ever seen, still to this day. You can keep watching it. And then when in real formative years, when I stumbled on SCTV, and it was just amazing to me that they'd be making these jokes and references, just like my brother and I would do that. I just thought it was the funniest thing ever. It's too short-lived for sure. It wasn't long enough, but it was just truly, truly amazingly funny stuff. It wasn't a funny situation. SNL always to me seems kind of like a funny situation. SCTV were truly funny characters.
Yes.
That they could continue to live. So you just go anywhere with Ed Grimley or Guy Calvolviero or Skrillini Peroso, I forget her name, and then of course, John Candy as Johnny LaRue. It's just so funny.
We didn't really get a lot of them in Montreal. But in my teenage years, I watched a lot of SNL with like Sandler, Mike Myers, Dana Carvey. And that, when you asked me the question, I was going with stand-ups, but there's no doubt about it. SNL and some of these like the Naked Gun, Dumb and Dumber kind of movies, those are the real comedy. That's
Dynamite.
Yeah.
Dynamite. Animal House. Go back and watch. If a lot of the folks listening to this may not have heard of a movie called Animal House. It's still funny. It's a bit dated, but it's just ridiculously funny.
I watched it recently for the first time. I will disagree.
Oh my God. You watched it for the first of all, you look like Ivan Reitman. So the director, if you look at him back in the day, he also looks a lot like you. Oh, just love the movie. Well, we'll resolve that another time, John.
Sure.
So first of all, thank you for joining us today on the Selling Well podcast.
Thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun.
This was a lot of fun. So the people listening are going to want to hear more. This connection between comedy and how you use it to train sales teams. How do they find out more about you or connect with you?
Look, the best place, there's two real ways to get a hold of me. Number one is LinkedIn. Drop me a line. Let's connect. JON. There's no H in John. SELIG. And that's also my URL. So jonselig.com. My business is comedy writing for revenue teams. And you just drop me a line through my website. You can even somehow get a hold of my email there. But LinkedIn's a great place to connect, and let's have a conversation there.
Amazing. And folks, as we think about trying to do something unique for our sales organization, something like John's approach, I think is fantastic. Well, we've got clients we're going to be thinking about this for too. So John, thank you again for joining today. What a great conversation. And team, thank you for joining the Selling Well podcast. So we run this podcast because we have this mission of increasing the professionalism of B2B sales, because we know if we do that, we'll actually improve the lives of professional salespeople. So we hope you enjoyed today's podcast. And if you did, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast, because that's actually how we get great guests like Jon when you do that. Now, the other thing is, team, we're growth oriented. And so a lot of the things we do on the podcast are because you gave us great suggestions. So please keep them coming. You can send your suggestions to us at markcox@inthefunnel.com, markcox@inthefunnel.com. That's my personal email, and I personally respond to every suggestion we get, and we love constructive criticism. So keep it coming our way. In the meantime, team, we'll see you next time on the Selling Well podcast, and tell your friends about this podcast. Thanks for joining us today.